Use debt to rich. It's not a lack of money that's holding you back. It's a lack of financial literacy. Robert Kiyosaky. From a young age, we were taught that getting into debt is dangerous, that borrowing money is a sign of weakness, and that responsible people are those who live debt-free. That belief was repeated so many times that it became an unquestionable truth. Parents, teachers, and even the banks themselves instilled in us the fear of owing money. But what if that truth was actually a big lie? Most people spend their entire lives running from debt, while the rich seek it out, study it, and use it as a tool to build empires. The paradox is that the rich not only have debts, they love them. They do not fear them, they manage them. They do not avoid them, they turn them into a lever for growth. When you look at the financial behavior of the richest people in the world, you discover a pattern that repeats itself over and over again. While the middle class struggles to repay their personal loans, the wealthy are asking for money to acquire assets. The difference is not in the amount of the debt, but in its purpose. If an ordinary person takes out a loan, they usually do so to buy a car, pay for a wedding, or cover an emergency. That is, it borrows to consume, not to produce. The rich, on the other hand, go into debt to multiply their money, borrow to invest, not to spend. Therefore, although both have debt, one becomes impoverished and the other becomes rich. The scarcity mindset taught us to protect ourselves from risk, but never to master it. We were trained to fear money, not to understand it. And that fear, that rejection of debt, has been one of the main reasons why millions of people remain stuck in the same financial place for their entire lives. Because the truth is that debt in itself is neither good nor bad, it is simply a tool. And like any tool, it depends on who uses it and for what purpose. A hammer can build a house or break a window. The difference is in the hands that hold it. Most people associate debt with anguish, with bank calls, with sleepless nights. For them, debt means loss of control. But for those who understand the game of money, debt is freedom. It is access to resources that allow value to be created before having your own capital. It's a way to accelerate growth without waiting decades. The rich understood something essential. Money has a cost, but it also has speed. And debt is the fuel that allows this financial speed to accelerate. Let's think of a simple example. Imagine you have $100,000 in your account. You could use them to buy a property for cash. You shouldn't owe anything. You would sleep peacefully, but that money would be immobilized. Instead, a smart investor would use that $100,000 as a down payment and ask the bank for $200,000 more to buy 3 properties instead of 1. While you have one house that may appreciate in value over time, the other has 3 assets that generate monthly income, pay off their own debt, and still leave them with cash flow. Both used money, but only one understood the power of leverage. The fear of getting into debt comes from a deep lack of knowledge about how the financial system works. When a bank lends money, it does not lose, it earns interest, generates profits, and multiplies its capital. If debt were such a bad thing, banks wouldn't create it. The irony is that the institution that tells us don't get into debt lives precisely by lending money. The rich look at this mechanism and think, if banks get rich by lending, why can't I do the same? And so they learn to play the other side of the board. While most work to pay interest, they collect it. While some suffocate by paying installments, others make their assets pay the installments for them. The key is to understand the difference between consumer debt and productive debt. Consumer debt takes money out of your pocket. Productive debt puts it in you. If you take a loan to buy a TV, you lose. If you take a loan to open a business that generates income, you win. It's that simple. That is why the rich do not measure their debt in terms of amount, but in terms of yield. They ask not how much do I owe, but how much do I get that I owe. That single difference of thought completely changes a person's financial destiny. But why do so few people understand it? Because the education system was designed to train employees, not investors. In school, we were taught to fear mistakes, to follow rules, not to take risks. And in the financial world, that mentality is a sentence of mediocrity. The rich do not fear getting into debt because debt is not paid with work, it is paid with flow. When a businessman asks for a loan to expand his factory, he does not think of the debt as a burden, but as a springboard. He knows that if he uses that money correctly, he will generate enough income not only to pay the bank, but to multiply his wealth. Let's think about a true story. In the 90s, a young entrepreneur named Sam had a small mechanical workshop. The business was going well, but it was limited. The bank offered him a $50,000 loan to buy more machinery. Sam hesitated. He thought of his father, who had always told him, "Never get into debt, son. Debts are chains." But after reflecting, he decided to take a chance. He bought new tools, hired more staff, and in 2 years his workshop tripled in size. It paid off the loan, generated new customers, and doubled his revenue. The debt did not enslave him, it freed him. That's the point. Debt doesn't bind you. What binds you is the fear and lack of knowledge. The scarcity mindset causes people to cling to what little they have, while the rich think about how to circulate money. And when money circulates, it grows. Debt, well used, is the vehicle that allows capital to be moved, create value, and take advantage of opportunities that otherwise would be out of reach. That's why when someone tells you that the rich don't have debts, they're repeating a myth. The truth is that the rich are more indebted than anyone else, but their debts are backed by assets, not spending. A billionaire may have hundreds of millions in loans, but those loans are invested in companies, properties, or technology that generates steady income, while the average person celebrates being debt-free, but they're also asset-free. The difference between debt and leverage is subtle but decisive. Debt is passive, when money does not produce a return. Leverage, on the other hand, turns that same debt into an engine of wealth. If a loan generates more income than it costs, it is not debt, it is an investment. Therefore, the secret is not to avoid debt, but to master it. Understand its cost, measure its return, and make it work in your favor. The rich do not go into debt to survive, they go into debt to grow. The next time you hear someone say, "I'd rather not owe anyone anything," remember that the world's largest banks, corporations, and investors live in debt not because they're irresponsible, but because they understood that money has a price, and paying it can be the door to wealth that fear will never allow to be achieved. The lie we were taught about debt wasn't just financial, it was mental. We were taught to fear what can actually set us free. And until we break that paradigm, we'll continue to play a game in which the rich set the rules and the others just try not to lose. But before continuing, write in the comments from which city you're listening to this audiobook, and if this message is resonating with you, like and share this material. This way, you make sure you don't miss out on any content that nourishes your mind and brings you closer every day to the life you really deserve. There is no time to lose. Now, we continue. Chapter 1. The Thinking of the Rich in the Face of Debt. Money is a tool. If you know how to use it, it can build you an empire. If not, it can destroy you. Warren Buffett. The rich don't see debt as a threat, they see it as a tool. While most people feel anxiety when they hear the word credit, the wealthy associate it with opportunity. That mental difference changes everything. It's not magic, or luck, or a hidden privilege. It's simply a different way of thinking and acting about money. For the middle class, debt represents an emotional burden. Getting into debt means losing freedom, being tied to a bank, living under the pressure of installments. Therefore, in their mind, the priority is to get out of debt as quickly as possible. But for the investor or entrepreneur, getting into debt is not losing freedom, it is gaining capacity of action. While one sees chains, the other sees levers.
A clear example is seen in the real estate market. If a traditional-minded person buys a house, their goal is to pay for it as soon as possible. He thinks that when he finishes paying it, it will finally be his. But the rich don't think so. He knows that that house, as long as it is under a mortgage, can continue to generate profits. He prefers to keep a controlled debt on the property, use that free capital to acquire more properties, and let the tenants pay the debt with their rent. In short, while the middle class works to pay for their house, the rich let their house work to pay for them. The difference in thought is abysmal. The first seeks emotional security, the second seeks financial freedom. And there is no freedom without control. The rich are not afraid of debt because they understand it. They know how much it costs, how much it produces, and how to manage it. They don't take impulse loans, they structure them precisely. They analyze the return, the terms, the interest. They are money strategists. The financial thinking of the rich is based on a fundamental idea. One's own money is the most expensive money that exists. Using only your money means limiting yourself to your own resources, and those who limit themselves stop growing. That is why the rich prefer to use other people's money, that of the bank, that of investors, or even that of the market to generate value. They think, if I can make 12% on an investment and the money costs me 6%, why use mine? From that difference, from that margin, wealth arises. A classic example is that of a real estate developer. Suppose you have $1 million. You could build a small building with your own money and run out of liquidity. Or he could use that million as collateral, ask for $4 million more, and build a project 5 times larger. If all goes well, the profit not only covers the cost of the loan, but multiplies your wealth. The important thing here is not risk, but control. The rich do not launch themselves without measuring. They leverage themselves intelligently. The middle class, on the other hand, usually thinks in terms of duty or non-duty, but the rich think in terms of return in flow. When an entrepreneur asks for a loan, he doesn't do so to consume, but to expand. He knows that every dollar he borrows has a productive function. Debt for him is an upfront investment. It is growth capital. The difference between the two thoughts originates in financial education. Those who grew up listening, "Don't get into debt," any form of leverage is closed. But those who learned that money can multiply if used strategically see debt as an opportunity to create wealth. The funny thing is that both can ask for the same amount of money. The difference will be in how they use it. Think about this. An entrepreneur takes out a $50,000 loan to open a coffee shop. In his mind, that debt is not a burden, but a seed. He uses it to rent a place, buy equipment, train personnel. If the business prospers, in less than a year, it can be generating income that covers the debt and produces profits. Another individual, on the other hand, takes out the same loan but uses it to travel, renovate their home, or buy a car. Both are indebted, but only one is building assets. The debt of the first is transformed into growth, that of the latter into consumption. The thinking of the rich is also characterized by their emotional detachment from money. They don't see it as something to be preserved, but as something to be moved. They know that money held loses value over time due to inflation, while money on the move creates value. That is why they are not concerned with duty, but with multiplying. They prefer to control large financed assets than small paid assets. A famous case is that of Jeff Bezos in the early years of Amazon. When the company began to grow, many advised him not to take on debt. However, Bezos decided otherwise. He used financing to expand his infrastructure and dominate the market faster. That decision made him one of the richest men on the planet. If he had waited until he had enough money of his own, Amazon would never have grown at that rate. Another notable example is that of Elon Musk. Although his personal fortune exceeds billions, he has publicly acknowledged that he finances many of his properties and projects. Why would someone with so much money ask for a loan? Because it understands opportunity cost. Every dollar tied up in a house is a dollar that is not generating a return on another investment. It is more profitable to pay interest on a mortgage than to leave capital dormant. Here comes a key principle. The rich do not use their money, they use their credit in their reputation. They know that financial confidence is as valuable as money itself. Banks, investors, and institutions trust them because they understand that a well-used loan generates wealth, and wealth pays its own debts. That is why the rich are not afraid of getting into debt. They know that their money, their knowledge, and their control of the flow of cash are their true guarantee.
Financial control is what separates smart leverage from disaster. It is not a matter of getting into debt for the sake of getting into debt, but of doing so with purpose and structure. The rich plan every debt as an investment. They evaluate the return, the risks, the liquidity, and above all, the flow. Because as long as there is flow, there is control. And as long as there is control, the debt is not a burden, but a tool for expansion. When an ordinary person takes out a loan, they think about how to pay it. When a rich person asks for a loan, he thinks about how to make it produce. That mental difference alone transforms debt into an asset. And although it may seem a minor detail, that is the invisible border that divides the mentality of the middle class and that of the rich. The rich know that it's not about working harder, but about making money work for them. And debt, well used, is one of the most effective ways to achieve this. An entrepreneur can finance a new product. An investor can acquire a property. An entrepreneur can scale his business. All of them use debt to create value. Debt becomes power when its language is understood. Interests, terms, flows, guarantees, all of these are not enemies, but allies when they are dominated. The rich study the rules of money like a chess player studies his opponent's moves, and when they master those rules, the game changes. Debt ceases to be an invisible enemy and becomes a strategic partner. Therefore, while some pride themselves in not owing anyone anything, others build fortunes with the money of others, and they do so with a very simple principle. If money can work for me, I don't need to work for money. The next time you hear someone say, "I don't go into debt," ask yourself if they're really free or just limited, because financial freedom isn't about owing less, but about being in control of the money you owe. The rich do not seek to eliminate debt, they demand to dominate it, and in that dominance lies their real advantage. This is how the rich think about debt. They do not fear it, they understand it. They do not reject it, they use it. They don't carry it, they handle it. And that thought, more than any amount of money, is what separates it from the rest of the financial world. Chapter 2. The Philosophy of Smart Leverage. Give me a pretty long lever and a fulcrum, and I'll move the world. Archimedes, the principle of financial leverage, is based on that same ancient idea. With the right tool, you can move something much bigger than you. In the world of money, that tool is the capital of others. While most strive to work harder, the wealthy focus on leveraging better, because those who depend only on their own effort or their own money will always be limited. Leverage is the key that transforms a small capital into a great opportunity. But what is financial leverage really? In its simplest form, it is using resources of others to multiply your own results. It's the art of using other people's money, time, knowledge, or assets to generate more value than you could create alone. Leverage is not just about debt, it's about expansion. It's about understanding that wealth is not created by isolating yourself, but by connecting you with the financial system and making it work in your favor. Most have a fear of borrowing because they don't understand how the smart money equation works. And this equation is simple. If the cost of capital is less than the return on investment, leverage makes you rich. If the opposite happens, it impoverishes you. The rich master this formula like a scientist masters a natural law. They don't take debt out of emotion, but of calculus. If the money they borrow costs them 5% per year, but they can invest it in something that yields 12%, that difference of 7% is net profit generated with other people's money. Leverage, therefore, is not an act of faith, but of mathematics.
Every decision is guided by numbers, not fears. An investor knows that if the cash flow generated by their investment covers the cost of the loan and leaves a positive margin, then they are using good debt. That is why the rich do not ask themselves how much I owe, but how much what I owe leaves me. Let's think of a concrete example. Imagine you have the opportunity to invest in a rental property that costs $200,000. You have the cash, you could buy it without debt, but you decide to finance 70% with the bank. That means you put down $60,000 and borrow $140,000. The bank charges you 6% per year, which is about $8,400 in interest, but the property leaves you with an annual rent of $20,000. After you pay off your mortgage, you have more than $1,000 left free. With that return, in a few years, you will have recovered your initial investment while the property appreciates. And you did all that with borrowed money. That's the essence of leverage, getting others to fund your growth while you retain control. Most, however, see only the risk. They think, what if I lose? But the rich think differently. What if I win? The risk does not disappear, it is managed. That's why smart leverage is based on information, analysis, and vision. It is not a question of blindly going into debt, but of knowing which debt drives you and which sinks you. The difference between the two extremes can be defined in a single sentence. Bad debt takes money from you, good debt gives you it. Bad debt is debt that is used to buy things that lose value or do not generate income. A loan for a television, for a vacation, or to pay for current expenses is a trap disguised as relief. You pay interest on something that produces no return. Good debt, on the other hand, is associated with assets that generate income, cash flows, or appreciation. It's the debt that brings you closer to financial freedom, not dependency. Smart leverage is based on using good debt strategically. It's not about how much you owe, but about what that debt produces for you. A businessman may owe millions, but if his assets generate enough income to cover that debt and continue to grow, he's freer than someone who owes nothing, but depends on a fixed salary. The rich understand that the real power of money is in its speed, not in its quantity. Dollar Quieto is a dead dollar, but a dollar in motion, circulating in investments, projects, or businesses, multiplies. That's why they use leverage to accelerate the movement of money. Every time they ask for a loan, that money doesn't sleep, it gets to work. Let's think of another example, this time a business one. A small factory produces furniture and earns $100,000 a year. Its owner could save and in 3 years buy new machinery, but he decides to leverage. He takes out a loan of $200,000, buys the machinery now, and doubles his production in 6 months. Income rises to $250,000, and although it must pay interest, its annual net flow increases to $150,000. In less than 2 years, it pays off the debt and maintains a larger and more profitable company. He didn't wait for the perfect moment, he created it using productive debt. That's what the rich understand better than anyone. Debt is not a burden, it's a temporary advantage. While others wait until they have money to act, they act to have more money. Debt becomes an accelerator of time. What you could achieve in 10 years with your own resources, you can achieve in 2 by using other people's capital intelligently. But leverage isn't limited to money. There's also human, technological, and knowledge leverage. An entrepreneur who hires a team instead of doing everything is only leveraging time and skills. An investor using automated software is leveraging technology. An entrepreneur who surrounds himself with mentors and experts is leveraging knowledge. All these are resources that multiply results without increasing personal effort. The rich always think in terms of multipliers, not direct effort. Financial leverage, however, has a golden rule. It should only be used to acquire assets that produce cash flow or appreciate over time. If a debt does not generate income or savings greater than its cost, it ceases to be leverage and becomes a burden. That's why the wealthy plan each loan as a project with goals and projections. Every dollar borrowed should have a specific, measurable function. The smart money equation is not complex, but it requires discipline. It consists of 3 steps. First, understand how much the money you are asking for costs. Second, calculate how much that money can produce if you invest it. And third, to maintain a margin of safety between them. That margin is your profit and your shield against unforeseen events. If an investment yields 10% and the money costs 5%, the 5% margin is your comfort zone. But if that margin disappears, debt becomes a risk. For this reason, the rich not only leverage but also diversify and control the flow. Smart leverage is a dance between control and expansion. It's not about getting into debt without measure, but about knowing how far your management capacity goes. The rich have advisors, systems, and metrics. They know when to brake and when to accelerate. Therefore, even if they are highly leveraged, they don't feel in danger. They are in control. Many confuse prudence with fear. Being prudent is not avoiding debt, it is knowing it. Fear paralyzes, prudence analyzes. The prudent rich do not avoid leverage, they dominate it, and when he masters it, money works for him even when he sleeps. Imagine 2 people with the same opportunity, opening a restaurant. One decides to save for 10 years to have the necessary capital. The other looks for partners and investors, shares profits, and opens the restaurant in 6 months. 10 years later, the first person has just opened his premises. The second already has a chain of restaurants. That's the difference between the effort mindset and the leverage mindset. At its core, smart leverage is not just a financial strategy, but a philosophy of life. It teaches to think big, to multiply instead of accumulating, to move with vision and calculation. The rich don't get rich because they're lucky, they get rich because they use the system's resources to build value before everyone else. Leverage, in essence, is the art of creating more with less. It is understanding that money should not be an obstacle, but a vehicle. And when you understand it, debt stops being scary and begins to open doors. Because true wealth is not in having everything paid for, but in having everything working. And when you learn how to use other people's money to create assets, you discover that financial freedom is not achieved by paying debt, but by making debts work for you. Chapter 3. Real Examples. How Millionaires Think Differently. The rich buy assets, the poor passives, and the middle class passives who believe they are active. Robert Kiyosaky. When we look at the lives of millionaires, many of their decisions seem illogical to those who think from the traditional mindset. People with fortunes of hundreds or billions of dollars who still are financing their homes, borrowing or selling stocks to get liquidity. But behind those decisions is a powerful logic. The rich do not seek to have immobile money, they seek to have money in motion. They understand that cash flow is more important than accumulation, and that liquidity is the oxygen of opportunities. A clear example is that of Elon Musk. Many believe that being one of the richest men in the world, he lives surrounded by luxury financed with his own money. The reality is different. For years, Musk used debt as a strategic tool. In 2021, when his fortune exceeded $200 billion, he took out loans backed by his Tesla shares. Instead of selling them, which would have generated taxes and reduced his stake in the company, he used them as collateral to obtain liquidity. That money was not used for banal expenses, but for financing new projects like SpaceX or Neuralink. Musk knows that his capital has to be working, not standing still. He'd rather pay low interest to a bank than lose control of his assets or sacrifice his company's growth potential. Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Meta, follows a similar reasoning. When he bought his Palo Alto house, he didn't pay for it in cash, despite having billions on hand. He opted for a mortgage loan with an interest rate of less than 1%. Why? Because he knew that the same money invested in his company or in financial instruments would generate returns much higher than that cost. In other words, he preferred to have cheap debt and maintain profitable liquidity. This is a completely opposite mindset of the middle class, who see debt as an enemy.
For the wealthy, debt is a silent ally that allows them to expand their control without weakening their cash flow. These cases are no exceptions. Most large fortunes are built and maintained through a strategic use of debt. Take the case of Donald Trump before his political career. His real estate empire was built on the principle of leverage. When he acquired property, he rarely paid for it with his own money. He negotiated with banks, used the value of his existing assets as collateral, and obtained financing to acquire new ones. If the property increased in value or generated enough rent to cover the payments, the debt paid for itself. Trump understood that the real game of wealth is not in being an outright owner, but in controlling assets with as little capital as possible. Another fascinating case is that of Ray Kroc, the man who transformed McDonald's into a global empire. Kroc was penniless when he met the McDonald brothers, but saw the potential of the brand and decided to leverage himself. Not only did he borrow money, he convinced investors to finance the expansion. He used debt to build premises and then leased those same premises to franchisees, generating a steady cash flow. In this way, he turned the debt into a cash factory. Kroc understood that the important thing was not to have money, but to create a system that generated it. Warren Buffett, considered the most successful investor in history, has also defended the rational use of debt. On multiple occasions, he's explained that borrowing is not bad if income streams are predictable and the profit margin is greater than the cost of capital. Berkshire Hathaway, his company, has used corporate debt to finance acquisitions and expand without diluting stake. Buffett does not go into debt out of necessity, but of opportunity. For him, the key is to understand time and the value of money.
Today is worth more than a day tomorrow, and if he can use cheap debt to accelerate yields, he will. These examples reveal an uncomfortable truth. The rich do not become rich by avoiding risks, but by managing them intelligently. They understand that every dollar has an opportunity cost. If you have money saved in the bank that does not produce, you're losing potential. That is why they keep their liquidity focused on investments, not on unproductive savings. Instead of paying debts for peace of mind, they pay debts with strategy. The most common middle-class misconception is that having zero debt equals financial freedom. But freedom doesn't come from owing little, but from having assets that produce more than you owe. The wealthy are looking to expand their ability to generate income, not just cut expenses. They keep their lines of credit open, their active banking relationships, and their liquidity ready to jump on the next opportunity. Let's look at a more everyday example. Suppose an investor has $1 million available. You could buy a property for cash and get rents of $5,000 a month, but if instead you use that million as initial capital to buy 5 properties of $1 million each, financing the rest with debt, you now have 5 assets generating income. Even if you pay interest, your total cash flow will be much higher. And if the value of the properties rises, your wealth multiplies exponentially. That's the difference between thinking like a saver and thinking like a strategist. That logic applies even in times of crisis. During recessions, the wealthy take advantage of falling prices to buy depreciated assets. How do they do it? With liquidity that they obtain not from their money saved, but from lines of credit or secured loans. In 2008, as most fled the housing market, investors like Blackstone and other private equity funds bought thousands of properties at rock-bottom prices, financed with debt. Years later, when the market recovered, those properties multiplied in value. They used debt when others used fear. The mental difference is profound. For the common people, debt generates anxiety. For the rich, it generates action. They do not borrow to consume, they borrow to build. They do not buy liabilities that depreciate, but assets that produce. Every dollar borrowed has a clear mission: to generate more dollars. And if that money works while they sleep, then the system is working. There's a little-known story about Sam Walton, founder of Walmart. When the company was already huge with thousands of stores, Walton was still operating with a funded expansion mindset. He used debt to open new stores and improve infrastructure. In an interview, he said a phrase that sums up the philosophy of millionaires: if you can use cheap money to grow faster, why not do it? That question is at the heart of advanced financial thinking. It is not a question of having money, but of constantly multiplying it. Leverage in all these cases does not mean irresponsibility, it means control. The rich monitor every flow, every percentage, every return. They don't take debt on impulse, they analyze it like a surgeon preparing an operation. If the expected return is greater than the cost, they move forward. If not, they wait. That is why even if they're surrounded by loans, they live peacefully, because they know exactly how and when they're repaid. Even on a personal level, this philosophy changes everything. When a millionaire buys a car, he rarely pays for it in cash. He prefers to finance it at a low rate and keep his capital invested. When he buys a house, he looks for mortgage loans with fixed and predictable rates, not because he can't afford it, but because he knows his money produces elsewhere. It's a matter of financial efficiency, not necessity. These stories prove that debt is not the enemy. The real enemy is financial ignorance. Debt only destroys those who don't understand how to use it, but in the hands of those who dominate it, it becomes a bridge to abundance. The rich think differently because they don't seek to eliminate risk, but to dominate it. They don't seek stability, they seek growth. They don't work for money, they make money work for them. And that mentality is what marks the border between those who fear debt and those who build empires with debt. The former see credit as a threat, the latter see it as a tool. The former think about paying, the latter think about producing. And in the end, economic history always rewards those who dared to use other people's money intelligently. Because while many are still struggling to get out of debt, the truly rich have already learned something more powerful. You don't have to escape from debt, you have to learn to control it, transform it, and put it at your service. Chapter 4. The Strategy of the Money That Does Not Sleep. If your money is not working while you sleep, you'll have to work yourself for the rest of your life. Warren Buffett. Most people dream of having enough money to never rely on credit again. They dream of buying their house in cash, their car without financing, their assets without loans. They believe that this is the ultimate symbol of stability. But in reality, that mentality can become a silent trap. Paying everything in cash seems prudent, but many times it's one of the most expensive decisions you can make, because when the money stops moving, it stops multiplying. Money that sleeps loses value, loses power, loses opportunity. In a world where inflation slowly eats away at purchasing power and where investment opportunities come and go in a matter of months, keeping large sums immobile is like having an army that never goes into battle, and the rich know it. They understand that cash has only one purpose: to be put to work. Paying something in cash can give you peace of mind emotionally, but financially, it could be a bad move. Imagine you have $200,000 and decide to buy a house in cash. You'll feel mortgage-free, but you'll also be leaving all your capital trapped in a single asset that does not produce cash flow and whose rentability depends only on time in the market. On the other hand, if you use that money as an initial capital to buy 5 properties of $1 million each, financing the rest with debt, you now have 5 assets generating income. Even if you pay interest, your total cash flow will be much higher. And if the value of the properties rises, your wealth multiplies exponentially. That's the difference between thinking like a saver and thinking like a strategist. That logic applies even in times of crisis. During recessions, the wealthy take advantage of falling prices to buy depreciated assets. How do they do it? With liquidity that they obtain not from their money saved, but from lines of credit or secured loans. In 2008, as most fled the housing market, investors like Blackstone and other private equity funds bought thousands of properties at rock-bottom prices, financed with debt. Years later, when the market recovered, those properties multiplied in value. They used debt when others used fear. The mental difference is profound. For the common people, debt generates anxiety. For the rich, it generates action. They do not borrow to consume, they borrow to build. They do not buy liabilities that depreciate, but assets that produce. Every dollar borrowed has a clear mission: to generate more dollars. And if that money works while they sleep, then the system is working. There's a little-known story about Sam Walton, founder of Walmart. When the company was already huge with thousands of stores, Walton was still operating with a funded expansion mindset. He used debt to open new stores and improve infrastructure. In an interview, he said a phrase that sums up the philosophy of millionaires: if you can use cheap money to grow faster, why not do it? That question is at the heart of advanced financial thinking. It is not a question of having money, but of constantly multiplying it. Leverage in all these cases does not mean irresponsibility, it means control. The rich monitor every flow, every percentage, every return. They don't take debt on impulse, they analyze it like a surgeon preparing an operation. If the expected return is greater than the cost, they move forward. If not, they wait. That is why even if they're surrounded by loans, they live peacefully, because they know exactly how and when they're repaid. Even on a personal level, this philosophy changes everything. When a millionaire buys a car, he rarely pays for it in cash. He prefers to finance it at a low rate and keep his capital invested. When he buys a house, he looks for mortgage loans with fixed and predictable rates, not because he can't afford it, but because he knows his money produces elsewhere. It's a matter of financial efficiency, not necessity. These stories prove that debt is not the enemy. The real enemy is financial ignorance. Debt only destroys those who do not understand how to use it, but in the hands of those who dominate it, it becomes a bridge to abundance. The rich think differently because they do not seek to eliminate risk, but to dominate it. They are not looking for stability, they are looking for growth. They don't work for money, they make money work for them. And that mentality is what marks the border between those who fear debt and those who build empires with debt. The former see credit as a threat, the latter see it as a tool. The former think about paying, the latter think about producing. And in the end, economic history always rewards those who dared to use other people's money intelligently,
Because while many are still struggling to get out of debt, the truly rich have already learned something more powerful. You don't have to escape from debt. You have to learn to control it, transform it, and put it at your service. Chapter 4, or the strategy of money that does not sleep. If your money isn't working while you sleep, you'll have to work yourself for the rest of your life. Warren Buffett. Most people dream of having enough money to never rely on credit again. They dream of buying their house in cash, their car without financing, their assets without loans. They believe that this is the ultimate symbol of stability, but in reality, that mentality can become a silent trap. Paying everything in cash seems prudent, but many times it is one of the most expensive decisions you can make, because when money stops moving, it stops multiplying. Money that sleeps loses value, loses power, loses opportunity. In a world where inflation slowly eats away at purchasing power and where investment opportunities come and go in a matter of months, keeping large sums immobile is like having an army that never goes to battle. And the rich know it. They understand that cash has only one purpose: to be put to work. Paying something in cash can give you peace of mind emotionally, but financially, it can be a bad move. Imagine you have $200,000 and decide to buy a house in cash. You'll feel mortgage-free, but you'll also be leaving all your capital trapped in a single asset that doesn't produce cash flow and whose profitability depends only on time in the market. On the other hand, if you use that money as a down payment and fund the rest, you can use the remaining capital to invest in other projects that generate monthly income. In the end, you could have a house and also several sources of return. Money that doesn't sleep works for you, not with you. The rich do not seek to eliminate debt, they seek to dominate it. They apply what we could call the active money strategy. It consists of keeping capital always in circulation, constantly reinvesting it in productive assets. That strategy is based on a simple logic. If the cost of borrowing is less than the return you can get by investing, the right way to go is to use debt. It's the most powerful equation of smart money. For example, if a bank lends you money at 5% per year and you can invest it in a business or property that generates a 12% return, the difference of 7% is your net profit. That margin is what the rich seek and multiply. They do not focus on avoiding interest, but on generating higher returns. While the middle class struggles to pay off debt, the affluent strive to expand it strategically. Money has a cost, yes, but it also has a rhythm. And if your money stands still, the invisible cost is much higher. That's why when someone says, "I don't have debt," the rich hear something else. My money isn't moving. Having money tied up is losing the opportunity to leverage yourself. The rich prefer to keep credit lines open, access to capital, and liquidity in order to react quickly. In an environment where opportunities move at the speed of a decision, liquidity is power. One of the least understood secrets in the financial world is the hidden profitability of using debt. It's not just about the direct return an investment produces, but the value that is created by freeing up equity. For example, if you have $1 million and decide to invest it all in a project that yields you 10%, you will earn $100,000 a year. But if you use just $200,000 to seed money and fund the rest, you can invest the other $800,000 in other assets. If each yields a similar percentage, your total win is multiplied by 5 or more. That is the power of not letting money sleep. Profitability is not always measured in immediate money, but in control, liquidity, and speed. When money flows, opportunities multiply. When it stops, growth freezes. The rich understand this as a natural law, which is why they avoid tying large sums to a single asset. They prefer to control many with small portions of equity and smart financing. This brings us to one of the golden rules of smart money, the 10% rule. Never use all your own money. Use only a fraction. The rest should remain available to multiply your options. This rule is not about greed, but about strategy. Whoever uses all his money loses maneuver power. Those who use only a part gain flexibility. Millionaires know that the key is not to own everything, but to control more with less. Think about how large investment funds operate. They rarely invest 100% of the capital in a single play. They always leave a liquid portion, ready to react to new opportunities or cover unforeseen events. Control of money is not about having more, but about keeping it moving and under control. And leverage allows for just that, expanding your reach without draining your resources. Paying in cash, on the other hand, may seem like a sensible decision, but it actually leaves you vulnerable. When new opportunities arise, you don't have the liquidity to take advantage of them. It's the classic case of someone buying a property with cash. He feels free, but when a profitable business appears, he cannot enter because his money is asleep in bricks. Meanwhile, those who financed their property and kept liquidity can invest, grow, and generate more. The difference is in the speed of money. The rich live in a cycle of constant movement. They ask, they invest, they return, they reinvest. They never let capital rest. And it's not because they live with anxiety, but because they understand that money is like blood. If it stops circulating, the system stops. Another advantage of keeping money active is the compound effect. Each reinvested profit generates new profits that are in turn reinvested. This cycle, repeated for years, produces exponential results. But for the compound to work, money must move. If you stop it to pay everything in cash, you break the chain of growth. The rich also take advantage of debt to optimize their tax burden. In many countries, interest on certain loans can be deducted from taxes, reducing the real cost of debt. And by maintaining active investments, they can take advantage of depreciation, tax credits, and deductions that increase their net return. While the middle class works to pay taxes and debts, the rich make debts work to reduce their taxes. A concrete example, a businessman buys machinery with financing instead of paying it in cash. That debt allows him to deduct interest as an expense, conserve capital for other projects, and increase his operating cash flow. If the machinery produces constant income, the debt pays itself, and the entrepreneur ends up with a productive asset and available liquidity. That is the essence of smart debt. Sleeping money also has an invisible enemy, inflation.
Every year, your money is worth a little less. If you store it or tie it up in an unproductive asset, you're losing real value. On the other hand, if you keep it circulating, investing, generating, your capital is not only protected, but grows. The rich know that the real risk is not in getting into debt, but in standing still. So when you hear someone say, "I'd rather not owe anything," remember, emotional peace of mind isn't always a financial strategy. The rich do not seek to be calm, they seek to be prepared. They would rather have good debt working than money still dying. It is not a question of living in debt, but of using debt as a driver, not as a burden. The key is discipline. Keeping money awake requires control, vision, and analysis. It is not a matter of moving it for the sake of moving it, but of directing it with purpose. Each dollar must have a function to produce more dollars. Each debt must have a plan, generate flow, and every decision must be guided by an essential question. This money is growing or it is sleeping. The rich do not accumulate money for the sake of accumulating it. They accumulate assets that produce money, and to achieve this, they use leverage constantly and strategically. They don't let the fear of debt limit them. They understand that debt, when used wisely, is not an enemy of success, but its fuel. This is how the strategy of money that does not sleep operates. Never tie up capital, never use it all, never leave it alone. Because in the financial world, money that rests too long ends up disappearing, but money that moves multiplies. And that is the silent philosophy of the truly rich. They don't keep the money, they win. Every year, your money is worth a little less. If you store it or tie it up in an unproductive asset, you're losing real value. On the other hand, if you keep it circulating, investing, generating, your capital is not only protected, but grows. The rich know that the real risk is not in getting into debt, but in standing still.
So when you hear someone say, "I'd rather not owe anything," remember, emotional peace of mind isn't always a financial strategy. The rich do not seek to be calm, they seek to be prepared. They would rather have good debt working than money still dying. It is not a question of living in debt, but of using debt as a driver, not as a burden. The key is discipline. Keeping money awake requires control, vision, and analysis. It is not a matter of moving it for the sake of moving it, but of directing it with purpose. Each dollar must have a function to produce more dollars. Each debt must have a plan, generate flow. And every decision must be guided by an essential question. This money is growing or it is sleeping. The rich do not accumulate money for the sake of accumulating it. They accumulate assets that produce money, and to achieve this, they use leverage constantly and strategically. They don't let the fear of debt limit them. They understand that debt, when used wisely, is not an enemy of success, but its fuel. This is how the strategy of money that does not sleep operates. Never tie up capital, never use it all, never leave it alone. Because in the financial world, money that rests too long ends up disappearing, but money that moves multiplies. And that is the silent philosophy of the truly rich. They don't keep the money, they wake it up. Chapter 5. The Science of Good Debt. When Robert Kiyosaky wrote, "It's not about how much money you make, but how much money you make work for yourself," he was essentially describing the science of good debt. Because debt, well used, is not an enemy, it's a lever. And like any lever, it can lift you up or crush you. The difference is in how you handle it, in the precision with which you understand its strengths, and in the strategy with which you apply it to your life. Most people fear debt because they don't understand it, because they've seen it destroy others, or because they associate it with personal crises. But the rich study it, measure it, and turn it into an ally that multiplies its results. The first step to mastering smart debt is to understand that not all debts are created equal. There are those that make you poorer, the bad, and those that make you richer, the good ones. Bad debts are used to consume, to obtain immediate pleasure, or to appear a wealth that does not exist. A new car, a financed phone, a credit card to pay for vacations. All are short-term traps that only enrich the banks. Instead, good debts are used to acquire assets, to build systems that make money, even while you sleep. Buying a property to rent, financing machinery for a profitable business, or investing in education that multiplies your future income are all examples of good debt. The key is this: if debt puts money in your pocket, it's good. If debt takes money out of your pocket, it's bad. There are 3 essential criteria that define smart debt. The first is measurable return. All good debt must finance something that produces more money than it costs. If you take out a loan at 8% per year and the business you finance yields 20%, you are generating a net profit of 12% on other people's money. That spread is the heart of financial leverage. But if the return is uncertain or depends on chance, then it's not an investment, it's a gamble. That's why the rich study the numbers before signing a contract. The second criterion is the ability to control. A smart debt is one that you have some control over. You can influence results, adjust strategies, optimize performance. If you invest in a property, you can choose the neighborhood, negotiate the price, improve the property, or increase the rent. But if you use a card for personal expenses, you have no control over its return. Every payment is money that evaporates without creating value. The rich never go into debt for things they can't control. And the third criterion is sustained liquidity. Good debt shouldn't choke your cash flow. If a financed investment forces you to live on the edge with constant pressure to pay installments, it ceases to be leverage and becomes a chain. The rich use debt to free up capital, not to enslave themselves. They always maintain a safety margin, positive cash flow, emergency reserves, and an exit plan in case of unforeseen events. Debt, in that sense, is administered as a powerful surgical instrument, but dangerous if used without precision. A clear example is in the real estate world. Let's say you have 100,000 pesos. An average person would use all that money to buy an apartment in cash and put it up for rent, obtaining an income of about 700 pesos a month. But a smart investor would use those same 100,000 pesos as initial capital to acquire 5 mortgage-financed apartments. That way, with a net income of 300 euros in each property, he would be generating more than double what he would earn with a single property. As such, while tenants pay the mortgages, the value of the properties increases over time. That is the multiplier effect of good debt. Another case study is observed in business. Imagine an entrepreneur who needs 50,000 pesos to expand his business. He could wait years to save that amount, missing out on opportunities for growth. Or he could be financed with debt at a rate of 10%, as long as his projections show that this investment will increase his income by 30%. If the subsequent net flow covers the debt and leaves profits, the loan becomes a catalyst for expansion. The rich don't go into debt for necessity, they do it as a strategy. In contrast, bad debts are disguised as comfort. They are interest-free installments, easy credits, quick loans. But behind this apparent ease hides a trap, that of unproductive consumption. Every payment that generates no return is a silent flight of capital. The middle class often falls into it believing it is progressing, when in reality it is just changing debt. The science of good debt also involves understanding the cost of money over time. The value of $1 today will not be the same in 10 years due to inflation and investment power. The rich advantage that. They borrow money today, invest it in something that grows faster than inflation, and pay off their debts with dollars that worth less in the future. It's a quiet but powerful strategy. While most worry about getting debt off their backs, the rich worry about making debts work for them. Let's think of another example. A 30-year mortgage with a fixed rate of 5%. Over time, the owner's income increases, but the amount of the fee remains the same. In real terms, the weight of this debt is reduced. Meanwhile, the value of the property rises, and the income it generates increases. Thus, debt that seemed like a long-term commitment transforms into an asset that pays for itself. There is also a psychological component. Good debt requires mental discipline. You can't use borrowed money as lightly as you would your own. The rich understand that leverage demands responsibility, plan flows, calculate risks, and keep a cool head in times of uncertainty. They know that the power of debt is much in emotional control as it is in numbers. An element that few mention is timing. Knowing when to take on debt is just as important as knowing how much. Taking out a loan during a recession can be dangerous if the flow is unsecured, but it can be an opportunity if the market recovery is anticipated. Experienced investors combine intuition and analysis, studying rates, evaluating trends, and leveraging when the costs of money are low and the prospects for return are high. Finally, the science of good debt is summarized in a simple but powerful formula. Controlled debt plus profitable investment equals accelerated freedom. Bad debt forces you to work for money. Good debt makes money work for you. And that difference, although it may seem small, defines the financial destiny of millions of people, because he who dominates debt dominates time, and he who dominates time dominates his wealth. The rich know every dollar borrowed can be a seed. If you plant it in fertile soil, an asset that produces flow and value will grow. But if you plant it in the field of consumption, only a momentary illusion will flourish. The science of good debt is not about duty, but about directing, guiding other people's money towards goals that build freedom, and that, in the end, is the most intelligent way to multiply wealth. Chapter 6. Inflation. The invisible ally of smart investors. If you understand inflation, you're already playing a different game than 90% of people, Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner, once said. Most fear inflation because they see it as a force that eats away at the value of their money, but the wealthy, the truly financially savvy, see it as a wave that can propel the highest and learn to surf it. Inflation does not destroy everyone equally. It punishes savers, but it rewards those who own assets and know how to use debt. To understand why the rich thrive in inflationary times, we must start with a simple fact. Inflation is a silent form of taxation. When prices go up and your money doesn't grow at the same rate, you're losing purchasing power. If you keep 10,000 pesos under the mattress and annual inflation is 10%, in a year, that money is worth only 9,000 pesos in real terms, not because you have fewer tickets, but because you can buy fewer things with them. That is the trap into which millions of people fall who believe that saving is safe. In reality, they are guaranteeing a slow but steady loss. The rich, on the other hand, understand that cash is like ice, it melts over time. That is why instead of conserving it, they move it, invest it, buy assets, finance projects. While the saver sees inflation as an enemy, the investor sees it as a favorable wind that pushes the value of his assets upwards. If inflation causes prices to rise, it also raises the value of property, stocks, businesses, and of course, leveraged assets. Imagine two people in the same inflationary environment. One keeps 100,000 pesos in a savings account at 1% per year. The other buys a property of the same value, financing 80% with debt at 5% fixed. A year later, inflation rises to 10%. The saver lost purchasing power, your money is worth less, but the investor sees how his property is now worth 110,000 pesos, while his debt remains the same, 80,000 pesos. Inflation reduced the real value of his debt, but increased the value of his assets. In other words, he made money without doing anything but understanding the game. This happens because fixed-rate debt becomes a shield against inflation. When you borrow money and prices go up, you pay that money back in the future with bills that are worth less. It's as if time is on your side. That's why the rich aren't afraid to borrow when rates are low and there are signs of inflation. They see it as an opportunity. While the average worker struggles to maintain the value of his wage, the investor uses the bank's money, invests it in productive assets, and lets inflation do the work of reducing the real weight of his debt. Inflation also has a psychological effect that few notice. It pushes people towards consumption or investment. When everything goes up in price, those who understand economics rush to move their money before it loses value. But only those who are financially educated know where to place it strategically. In inflationary times, tangible assets such as real estate, energy, agriculture, metals, or companies with market power tend to skyrocket. That's why while many complain that everything is more expensive, the rich are earning more than ever. A clear example is what happened after the 2020 pandemic. Global inflation rose sharply due to massive money printing. What did the rich do? They bought real assets. Warren Buffett invested billions in energy and transportation. Musk maintained his corporate debt and increased his capital invested in new plants. Institutional investment funds acquired land, buildings, infrastructure. They knew that prices would continue to rise and that every dollar invested in something tangible would protect its value. Meanwhile, millions of people left their money in the bank, earning 1 or 2% a year, while inflation devoured 8 or 10%. They lost purchasing power every day, but they felt safe. That is the great irony. The security of the saver is the loss of the investor. Another crucial aspect that the rich understand is that inflation benefits those who have productive debt, not consumer debt. The difference is abysmal. If you have debt for a car or a TV, inflation doesn't help you because the asset loses value over time. But if you have debt for a property, a business, or an investment that generates income, inflation becomes an ally. Prices rise, income rises, but debt remains the same. The profit margin expands with each passing year. Let's take a practical example. Suppose an investor buys an office building with a loan of 1 million pesos over 20 years and a fixed rate of 5%. Their monthly rents comfortably cover the loan and leave positive flow. Over the years, rents rise with inflation, but their payment to the bank remains the same. In the year 10, accumulated inflation has reduced the real value of the million owed by almost half. In the meantime, the building is worth much more and generates higher rents.
In real terms, the investor has gained both by cash flow and by appreciation, and his debt no longer is a burden, it is a tool that disintegrates over time. That's why the rich love fixed rates. They give them control and predictability. Instead, variable rates can be a risk if inflation gets out of control and central banks raise rates. But even that, the rich know how to use to their advantage. They refinance, diversify, or invest in assets that naturally adjust to inflation, such as real estate or companies with market power. The key is to turn inflation into a boost, not an obstacle. To achieve this, 3 concrete strategies are needed. First, invest in real and productive assets. Anything that can adjust to prices or generate revenues above inflation is a protection. It is not a question of speculation, but of participating in the real economy. Land, buildings, essential businesses, energy, food, transportation. Inflation raises their value, and those who own them win. Second, use smart debt to acquire those assets. If inflation is going to reduce the value of money, it makes sense to borrow it at low rates and pay it back in the future with bills that are worth less. This is only valid if the asset generates income or appreciates faster than the debt.
And third, to maintain strategic liquidity. The rich don't run out of cash. They have funds available to take advantage of opportunities when others are forced to sell. In periods of inflation, people with liquidity and vision are the ones who buy cheaply what others sell out of desperation. There is something else that makes inflation an ally of the rich: their mindset of control. They don't complain about market conditions, they use them. They know they can't stop inflation, but they can decide which side of the chessboard to play on. While most try to protect themselves without understanding the rules, they take advantage of them to multiply their wealth. Ultimately, inflation reveals an uncomfortable truth. The financial system rewards those who act as owners, not victims. If you depend only on your salary, inflation impoverishes you. If you own assets and understand the value of leverage, it makes you rich. It's that simple. Therefore, when you hear that inflation is bad, remember, it is bad only for those who do not understand it. The rich are not afraid of rising prices because they do not keep money, they keep assets. They do not get into debt out of necessity, they leverage themselves by strategy. And while the world complains about the cost of living, they see their wealth grow. At its heart, inflation is a reflection of time. And time, for savvy investors, it always works in their favor. Chapter 7. Risk and Protection: How to Use Debt Without Losing Everything. Those who do not understand risk should not play with debt, said Ray Dalio, one of the most respected investors in the world. And he was right. Debt in the wrong hands is like a scalpel in inexperienced hands. It can save you or destroy you. That's why the wealthy not only master the art of using debt to create wealth, they also master the science of protecting themselves from it. They understand that debt is not the enemy, but it does require respect, strategy, and discipline. The first mistake many make when using debt is confusing leverage with excess. They believe that having access to credit means having more power, when in reality it means having more responsibility. Leverage is only useful if it's backed by real, steady, and predictable cash flow. Going into debt to invest in a business that doesn't generate stable income or assets that don't produce immediate value is like jumping out of an airplane waiting to build the parachute as you fall. That is why the rich never leverage themselves based on their optimism, but on their numbers. The second common mistake is underestimating interest rates. Many entrepreneurs focus on how much they can earn, but they don't know how much the money costs them. A 12% loan may seem manageable when sales are good, but in an environment of economic contraction, that rate becomes a noose. The wealthy study rates like surgeons. They don't just look at nominal interest, but effective interest, hidden fees, payment frequency, terms, and flexibility to refinance. Their goal is not just to ask for cheap money, but to ask for smart money. Another devastating mistake is over-leverage, the point where debt stops working for you and you start working for debt. It happens when the total of your commitments exceeds the capacity of your income to cover them comfortably.
Prudent investors set clear limits, for example, that their total debts should not exceed 30% or 40% of their net monthly flow. And if they approach that limit, they do not ask for more credit, but optimize the use of what they already have. The golden rule of leverage is simple. It uses debt to generate freedom, not to mortgage it. The wealthy also avoid the mistake of borrowing with consumer debt disguised as investment. Many people justify buying luxury cars or expensive gadgets by saying they need it for work. But if that expenditure does not produce measurable income, it is not investment, it is consumption. Good debt always pays for itself. The bad one depends on your constant effort to sustain it. The difference is in whether the asset gives you money or takes it away from you every month. Now, how do the rich protect themselves from the natural risks of indebtedness? They do this by applying a series of financial shielding principles that function like seatbelts. The first of these is the liquidity margin. The rich always keep a cash cushion, a reserve that allows them to cover at least 6 months of payment without depending on active income. This fund is not meant to spend, but to survive. In times of crisis, those who have liquidity not only survive, they thrive. They can buy depreciated assets and renegotiate debts on favorable terms, while others are forced to sell at a loss. The second principle is risk diversification. No sensible investor puts all their loans into a single project or source of income. If one business depends on a single flow to pay off debt, any unforeseen event can bring it down. That is why the rich spread their risks. If one property stops generating income, another covers the difference. If one business slows down, another expands. This balance allows their debt structure to be resilient, like a network with multiple footholds. The third principle is to maintain control, not complete ownership. The wealthy would rather have control of many assets with debt than complete ownership of a single cash-paid asset. But that control is always accompanied by solid, secure contracts and exit mechanisms. Before taking on debt, they design a plan B and a plan C. What happens if rates rise? What happens if the market goes down? What happens if the partner withdraws? They have answers for every scenario. Their power is not in avoiding risk, but in anticipating it. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is falling in love with the opportunity and forgetting the risk. The wealthy do the opposite. They study the risk first and then the opportunity. They analyze the worst possible scenario. If they can survive it, they move forward. If not, they leave. That cold, calculating mindset is what protects them from losing everything. Debt ceases to be dangerous when it is managed with logic, not emotion. The prudent mindset of the leveraged investor is not fearful, but strategic. It understands that borrowed money is a powerful ally, but also an implacable judge. Every debt must have a clear reason and a measurable return. If you can't answer the question, how will this make me earn more than it costs me, then it is not worth taking. One principle that the rich religiously apply is to protect the flow before it grows. Many want to expand, buy more property, or invest in new businesses without making sure their current flows are shielded. But without flow, there is no growth. That is why before taking on new debt, investors strengthen their bases, eliminate unproductive debts, refinance at better rates, increase cash flow, and only then leverage again. Another common practice among the rich is to insure debt with real assets or predictable income. They don't borrow based on hope, but on evidence. If the asset can produce income even in difficult times, the debt is protected. If it depends on uncontrollable variables, such as fads, trends, or promises of growth, they avoid it. This principle separates the rational investor from the speculator. And there is a detail that almost no one mentions. The rich insure their debts with real insurance. They take out policies that cover the life, property, or business behind the debt. That way, if a tragedy occurs, the heritage doesn't crumble. Many successful entrepreneurs have saved empires thanks to a well-structured policy. Responsible debt is not only paid, it is also protected. Using debt wisely also involves knowing when not to use it.
There are times when the economic environment or asset type makes leverage more of a danger than an advantage. In hot-headed markets or when rates are at their highest, the rich prefer to wait. They maintain patience as their most valuable shield. They understand that the right opportunity funded at the right time is worth 10 rush deals. The rich have another key advantage: their emotional discipline. They don't get into debt on impulse or fear of missing the opportunity. They analyze, plan, and execute.
They know the debt is not measured in money, but in tranquility. Poorly managed debt steals sleep, energy, and freedom. A well-managed debt multiplies your resources and gives you control. That's why every financial decision is guided by a principle. I don't take debt to impress, but to progress. Finally, the principles for building sustainable wealth with debt are summarized in 4 pillars: clarity, control, liquidity, and purpose. Clarity, to know why you get into debt and what return you expect. Control, to manage credit conditions and not let credit handle you. Liquidity, to withstand the unforeseen and take advantage of opportunities. And purpose, to use debt as a tool that builds, not destroys. When these pillars are mastered, debt ceases to be a threat and becomes a competitive advantage. The secret is not to avoid risk, but to design it in your favor. The rich are no less vulnerable to error. They simply create systems that protect them from themselves. While the common people seek to pay all their debts to feel free, the rich build freedom with debts that work for them. Ultimately, the art of using debt without losing everything is to transform debt into discipline. Discipline to think before acting, to measure before signing, to create before consuming. Whoever manages to master that mentality enters a new financial league, one where debt is not a chain, but a key. And with that key, the rich open doors that others don't even know exist. Chapter 8. Of the Debt to Financial Freedom. Most people have grown up believing that debt is synonymous with slavery, trouble, and ruin. But those who understand the real rules of money know that debt can be a vehicle to financial freedom. The secret is not to avoid it, but to know how to turn it into a source of flow, growth, and expansion. Because debt, when used intelligently and purposefully, becomes a tool that multiplies time, resources, and opportunities. This is the path that many rich people walk in silence, while the rest cling to fear. Transforming debt into positive cash flow requires changing the way we interpret our financial obligations. For example, someone who buys a property to live in takes on a debt that only generates expenses: mortgage, maintenance, taxes. But someone who buys a property to rent out creates a steady stream of income that exceeds the monthly fee. That difference, that surplus that comes in every month, is the essence of positive cash flow. It's not just about having assets, but having assets that pay for themselves. Many millionaires think in terms of net leverage. They do not ask themselves how much I owe, but how much I get what I owe. If a debt generates more than it costs, it is a good debt. On the other hand, if it forces you to work harder just to pay it, it is a bad debt. It's that simple. The mistake of most is to fear the number in red without considering the asset behind it. Those who have a poor mentality seek to be debt-free. Those who have a rich mentality want the debt to work for them. Financial independence is not achieved by saving every coin, but by making each coin work harder than you. One's own money is limited. Other people's money, on the other hand, multiplies the possibilities. If you use credit to create a system that produces steady income, you're using debt wisely. Let's think of a concrete example: an entrepreneur who asks for a loan to open a laundromat. The initial debt may seem like a risk, but if the monthly flow of the machines exceeds the bank quota, the debt pays itself and generates net profit. In a short time, the business not only cancels the debt, but also frees up capital to open a second branch. That's positive leverage, the ability to transform debt into flow-generating assets. But it is not about jumping into the void. It is about designing a system where each peso borrowed has a clear purpose and a measurable return.
Before going into debt, you should ask yourself, is this money going to fall asleep or is it going to multiply? If the borrowed capital is used for expenses, it vanishes. If it is used for investment, it reproduces. The path to financial independence begins with controlling the flow. Controlling the flow means having clarity about how much comes in, how much goes out, and how the money behaves over time. You do not need to be a millionaire to get started. You need a strategic mindset. The rich did not start out rich. They started understanding the rules of the game. And the first rule is that debt is not your enemy. Financial ignorance is. One of the most powerful mental exercises is to think like an investor before acting like a consumer. Before you buy something, ask yourself if it will generate flow or drain it. For example, getting into debt for a vehicle that you only use on weekends is a passive debt. But if that vehicle is used for transportation, deliveries, or services, it becomes a productive asset. The same goes for any type of expense. If it doesn't give you a return, it takes you away from freedom. The rich don't focus on paying off all their debts as soon as possible, but on keeping capital moving. Every dollar that is not put to sleep, that is invested or reinvested, generates more value. This thinking goes against everything we were taught, but it is the one that allows some to achieve economic independence while others remain stuck in the wheel of wages. Immobile money loses power. Money in flux creates independence. Now, financial independence doesn't mean no debt. It means that your debts are designed to generate more than they cost. It means that your assets produce the money that pays your obligations. It means that your money works even when you sleep. For this reason, the rich do not seek to eliminate their debts, but to align them with their flow strategy. To get to that point, you need 3 key steps. First, identify productive debts, those that allow you to acquire or improve income-generating assets. Second, optimize the cost of money. That is, look for loans with low rates and comfortable terms that allow for greater flexibility. And third, to create reinvestment systems. Each time an asset pays off its debt, reinvest the profits into another similar or complementary asset. In this way, you build a chain of flow that feeds on itself. The path to freedom is not linear. It requires patience, knowledge, and emotional control. Many lose because they are looking for immediate results. The rich win because they think in decades, not months. They understand that every debt that generates cash flow is a stepping stone to independence, not a burden. The new paradigm is simple. Debt can be freedom when used with purpose, but freedom doesn't mean carefreeness. It means dominance. Mastering debt involves understanding it, measuring it, and using it strategically. Just as a pilot masters the speed of his plane without fearing it, the investor masters debt without being a slave to it. True independence comes when your cash flow exceeds your expenses and your assets generate enough income to sustain your lifestyle. At that point, debt ceases to be a concern and becomes a driving force. Each liability is backed by a stronger asset, and your money, far from stagnating, is constantly multiplying. Debt well used gives you something that savings can never give you: speed. It allows you to grow before you have it all, to expand while others wait, to act when others are only dreaming. But that speed requires steering. It's not about running faster, it's about moving to where the money works for you. When you change your perception, you change your destiny. You begin to see debt as an ally, credit as a tool, and interest as an opportunity cost. And when that happens, the fear disappears, and in its place, the strategy arises. Because financial freedom is not the result of avoiding risks, but of learning to manage them. Leverage no longer is a dangerous word, it becomes a promise of growth.
Those who learn to use debt wisely stop depending on their work to survive and begin to use their own and others' money to build a system that frees them. Debt doesn't have to be a chain. It can be a key. And that key, when used intelligently, opens the door to true economic independence. Epilogue: the power of smart money.
Robert Kiyosaki used to say that money doesn't make you rich. What makes you rich is how you think about money. And that simple but powerful phrase encapsulates the principle that separates those who build freedom from those who live trapped by debt. Because the real difference between the debt that impoverishes and the debt that enriches is not in the numbers, but in the mentality that manages them. Throughout modern financial history, most have been educated to fear credit, to believe that debt is synonymous with danger. But those who really understand how the system works know that money does not sleep, does not rest, and does not discriminate. It simply obeys those who dominate it. Debt, in the hands of someone with financial ignorance, becomes a trap. In the hands of someone with education, it becomes a tool for exponential growth. Smart money is one that moves strategically, does not stand still, does not accumulate in bank accounts for fear of losing it. It works, turns, multiplies, and above all, is at the service of a purpose. Smart money is never spent impulsively, it's allocated with intention. Those who think in terms of profitability, cash flow, and multiplication turn each financial decision into a move on a much larger board. People with a rich mindset understand that debt is neither good nor bad in itself, it's neutral. It's financial energy that you decide how to channel. If you use it to buy passives, it becomes cargo. If you use it to build assets, it becomes momentum. It all depends on the purpose you assign it. That is the key that the rich master. They do not get into debt out of desire, they get into debt out of strategy. The most common misconception of traditional thinking is to believe that financial freedom is achieved by eliminating all debt. It's actually achieved when your assets generate enough cash flow to pay off any debt and sustain your lifestyle without relying on your job. Freedom is not in the "I don't owe anything," but in the "my money produces more than I spend." That difference in focus is what marks people's destiny. Think of the figure of the intelligent investor. He does not pursue immediate wealth, but control of flow, assets, and time. He understands that his own money has an opportunity cost. Every immobile dollar could be working. That is why it uses external capital, financing, or credit, but with calculation and vision. He does not seek to impress anyone, he seeks real independence. Smart money also knows when to stop. Prudence is as important as ambition. The rich don't leverage themselves without limits because they understand that excess debt destroys even the best plans. That's why every decision is made with analysis, every investment is protected with reserves, and every step is taken with a cool head. The true mastery of money is not in taking blind risks, but in managing risk wisely. There's a silent rule that the rich practice constantly. They never use all their money. They always maintain liquidity because they understand that opportunities come when you least expect them, and only those who have available capital can take advantage of them. That capital often comes from well-structured debt, from lines of credit, from financing that is paid with the returns of the asset itself. It's a game of perpetual motion, where money flows like a river that never runs dry. Smart money is also emotionally stable. It does not act out of fear or euphoria. Most lose because they buy when everyone else buys and sell when everyone else sells. The rich do the opposite. They wait, observe, prepare, and when others flee from risk, they move forward with strategy. That cold, analytical mindset turns chaos into opportunity. The secret is not to have more capital, but to have more mind control. Because even with little money, someone with financial intelligence can build wealth as long as they understand how to use debt to their advantage. And someone with a lot of money but without mind control can lose everything in impulsive decisions. Money, like a fire, can heat or burn. It all depends on who manages it. Smart money has an essential characteristic. It generates freedom. It does not enslave, it does not squeeze, it does not compel, it flows to where there is purpose. When your investments, your assets, and your debts work in harmony, you achieve real independence. You are no longer dependent on a salary or time or uncertainty. You become the architect of your financial destiny. And that leads us to a final reflection. The game that the rich play is not reserved for an elite. It's not inaccessible or impossible. It's a game that anyone can learn, as long as they're willing to unlearn the myths of fear of money, the beliefs of scarcity, the ideas inherited from generations that never understood how the system works. Financial education is not about complicated formulas, but about simple principles applied with discipline. The first principle is to see debt as a tool, not an enemy. The second, to understand cash flow as the lifeblood of your financial system. If it flows, everything lives. If it stagnates, everything dies. And the third, to think long-term. The rich don't think about paying the months, they think about building decades. Smart money is not about greed, but about freedom. Freedom to decide, to act, not to depend. There's nothing more powerful than waking up every day knowing that your money is working while you live your life. That's the essence of independence, when your mind, your money, and your purpose align in a single direction. So the challenge is not to have more, but to think better. It's not about avoiding debt, it's about mastering it. It's not about making money, but about building systems that multiply it. The power of smart money is not in the quantity, but in the quality of your decisions. Because in the end, the difference between those who achieve freedom and those who live trapped by debt is not measured in numbers, but in mentality. And when you achieve that internal change, when you stop asking yourself, how much do I owe, and start asking yourself, what I'm creating with what I owe, then money stops being a problem and becomes an ally. At that moment, you understand what the rich always knew, that true wealth is not having a lot, but knowing how to make money work for you without enslaving you. That's the power of smart money, a quiet, disciplined, focused power. A power that does not depend on chance, but on strategy. A power that anyone can learn to master as long as they're willing to see money not as an end, but as a tool to build freedom. Because in the end, debt does not have to be a burden. It can be, if you choose, the key that opens the door to your financial independence. So, if this audiobook inspired you and you're ready to continue delving into your personal growth and inner transformation, I invite you to discover another revealing audiobook that will change the way you see the world, your decisions, and your potential. Click, and we'll see you there.
Thank you so much, friend, for listening. Leave your ideas in the comments section so our community can grow by learning together. That's all for now. Until the next audiobook,